Listen closely to the sound of a professional French kitchen, and you will hear the rhythmic, metallic scrape of a flexible boning knife sliding against bone. A chef is working on a Moulard duck, separating the breast from the carcass with clinical precision, leaving behind a piece of meat that looks more like a beef tenderloin than poultry. Meanwhile, in a traditional kitchen in Beijing, the air is filled with a completely different sound, the low hum of an air compressor. A chef inserts a nozzle under the skin of a Pekin duck and inflates the bird until it resembles a tight, shiny football. The French chef utilizes a series of deep, linear cuts to dismantle the animal, while the Chinese chef uses a single, hidden incision under the wing to keep the bird completely whole. These contrasting methods of butchery are not random cultural preferences. They are highly calculated, historical, and scientific solutions to a single, shared biological challenge: how to cook a water bird wrapped in a thick, insulating blanket of fat. To understand the mechanics of duck butchery, we must first look at the biological differences between the birds themselves. In the West, especially in France, the king of ducks is the Moulard. The Moulard is a hybrid breed created by crossing a female Pekin duck with a male Muscovy duck. The Muscovy duck, native to the warm wetlands of South America, is uniquely muscular, possessing red, lean flesh that has a flavor profile closer to beef or venison than to chicken. When crossed with the Pekin, the resulting Moulard hybrid inherits this rich, beefy muscle structure. Crucially, the Moulard was not bred for its meat originally, but for its liver, to produce foie gras through the ancient French agricultural practice of gavage, or force-feeding. Because of this high-energy grain diet, the Moulard duck develops an extraordinarily thick layer of fat on its breast, known as the magret. The meat itself is dark, dense, and lean, but it is covered by a massive shield of subcutaneous fat. In contrast, the traditional Chinese duck is the purebred Pekin duck, known in China as the Beijing imperial duck, descended directly from wild mallards. This breed was historically fed on a high-starch diet of grains and kept relatively inactive in pens. This lifestyle created a bird with a more even distribution of fat across the entire body, with a skin that is incredibly elastic, soft, and thick. Thus, the French chef starts with a bird designed for its liver and breast, while the Chinese chef starts with a bird designed to be roasted in its entirety. This difference in breeds immediately dictates the first physical action of the butcher: how to open the bird. In the French tradition, the duck is treated as a puzzle to be solved by disassembly. The butcher begins by laying the duck on its back and making a deep incision down the breastbone. Using a thin, flexible blade that curves around the skeletal structure, the chef separates the breasts, or magrets, from the ribcage. Next, they cut through the hip joints to remove the legs. This style of butchery is highly analytical. By breaking the duck down into its individual components, the French chef can apply different cooking techniques to different parts of the bird. The breast, which is red meat filled with myoglobin, is treated like a steak. It must be served medium rare to remain tender. The legs, which are tough and full of connective tissue, must be slow cooked for hours in oil to break down the collagen. If the French chef roasted the entire bird whole, the breast would dry out into a chalky, metallic mess long before the legs became edible. To handle the massive layer of fat on the separated breast, the French chef uses a technique called scoring. Using a sharp knife, they cut a crosshatch pattern into the skin. This is a crucial physical intervention. The cuts must go all the way through the skin and fat, but must not touch the red meat underneath. This scoring serves two purposes. First, it increases the surface area of the fat exposed to the pan, allowing it to render out rapidly. Second, it prevents the skin from shrinking and buckling as it heats, which would cause the breast to curl up and cook unevenly. When the scored breast is placed in a cold pan over low heat, the fat slowly melts away, leaving a thin, crispy skin attached to a perfectly juicy, medium-rare steak. For the tough legs, the chef employs the confit method. The meat is first cured in salt and herbs to draw out excess moisture and tighten the muscle fibers. It is then submerged in rendered duck fat and poached at a low temperature, around 90 degrees Celsius, for several hours. This slow thermal process breaks down the tough collagen fibers into rich, melting gelatin, turning tough muscle into incredibly tender meat. In China, however, the concept of cutting the duck open along the breastbone is considered a failure of technique. To the Chinese chef, the skin of the duck is the most valuable part of the animal, and any cut made across the breast would ruin the final dish. Therefore, the Chinese butcher uses a technique called the wing cut. Instead of slicing the belly open, the butcher makes a single 3-inch incision directly under the right wing. Through this tiny opening, the chef reaches inside the cavity with their fingers to pull out the viscera and organs. This requires immense skill, as the butcher must work entirely by feel, ensuring they do not rupture the intestines or tear the internal walls. By keeping the rest of the body completely sealed, the chef preserves the structural integrity of the skin. Once the duck is eviscerated, the Chinese chef executes the air inflation. Using a pump, they force air through the neck skin, which travels between the skin and the subcutaneous fat, blowing the duck up like a balloon. The air physically detaches the skin from the underlying fat layer, creating a pocket of insulation. Next, the duck is scalded with boiling water, which causes the skin to shrink, tighten, and lock in the air pocket. The skin is then coated with a syrup of maltose and red vinegar, and hung to dry in a cool, breezy room for 24 hours. The drying process is critical, because it evaporates all surface moisture, creating a parchment-like skin that traps the air inside when roasted. When the duck is hung in the oven, the hot air surrounds the bird. The heat melts the fat layer, but because the skin is separated by a pocket of air, the melting fat does not soak into the meat. Instead, it drips down and escapes through the tail, while the skin itself dries out and crisps up, essentially frying in its own oil from the inside out. But how does the meat cook if it is insulated by this pocket of air? This is where the wing-cut butchery reveals its true genius. Before the duck is hung in the oven, the chef pours boiling water, mixed with spices, ginger, and star anise, directly into the cavity through the wing incision. The opening is then plugged with a wooden peg or a piece of sorghum stalk. When the duck enters the hot oven, the liquid inside the cavity begins to boil. The duck is now cooking from 2 directions at once. From the outside, the dry heat of the oven and the smoke of burning peach wood roast and crisp the skin. From the inside, the boiling liquid creates high-pressure steam that cooks the meat, keeping it incredibly moist and infusing it with aromatics. The duck behaves like a dual-chamber convection steam engine. This difference in butchery also extends to the tools of the trade. The French butcher relies on the couteau à désosser, a thin, narrow, highly flexible knife designed to navigate the tight corners of the skeletal system. It is a tool of dissection. The Chinese chef, however, relies on the pian dao, a wide, rectangular slicing knife. While it looks like a heavy cleaver, it is actually incredibly light and ground to a razor-sharp, thin edge. The pian dao is not used to chop through bones, but to slice the roasted duck at a flat angle. The goal of the Chinese carver is to slice the duck into exactly 108 thin pieces, each slice containing a perfect balance of crispy skin, a thin layer of fat, and tender meat. These technical choices are deeply tied to the history of food preservation and commercial distribution in Europe and China. In France, the rise of the professional guild system in the Middle Ages created specialized trades. The butcher sold raw, portioned meats, while the charcutier sold preserved meats. This division of labor encouraged the selling of ducks in parts. Furthermore, French ovens were historically horizontal hearths, where birds were roasted on spits. This horizontal roasting meant that fat would pool on one side of the bird, preventing the skin from crisping evenly. Thus, breaking the bird down into portions was a practical response to horizontal cooking technology. In China, particularly during the Yuan and Ming dynasties, the imperial court optimized vertical cooking. The Chinese developed the hung oven, gualu, where ducks are hung vertically from hooks attached to their necks. This vertical arrangement allowed dozens of ducks to be roasted simultaneously in a very small footprint, conserving precious firewood. The melting fat dripped downward naturally, basting the lower parts of the bird as it fell. Furthermore, Chinese culture, heavily influenced by Confucian philosophy, views the presentation of a whole animal at the dining table as a symbol of unity, completeness, and prosperity. Serving a cut-up, disassembled bird would be seen as a disrespectful act of fragmentation, representing a broken family or project. But the final twist in this comparison lies in the ultimate culinary objective. While the French and Chinese methods appear to be polar opposites, one dissecting the bird to cook it in pieces, the other sealing the bird to cook it whole, they are both pursuing the exact same scientific goal: the thermal separation of fat from muscle. Both culinary traditions understood that duck fat is a double-edged sword. It is highly flavorful, but if it is not properly rendered and separated from the meat, it leaves the dish greasy and unpalatable. The French chef, achieves this separation through mechanical disassembly and pan-searing. The Chinese chef achieves it through thermodynamic isolation and vertical roasting. Today, these two ancient philosophies are no longer operating in isolation. Modern culinary science has bridged the gap. Western chefs now use air injection needles to loosen the skin of chickens and turkeys before roasting, while Chinese chefs frequently use French-style pan-searing techniques to cook individual portions of duck breast for modern-tasting menus. Ultimately, the way a culture butchers a duck reveals its underlying intellectual framework. The Western approach, shaped by the scientific revolution, is analytical and reductionist. It breaks the whole down into its component parts to master each one individually. The Eastern approach, shaped by holistic philosophy, is systemic and integrationist. It preserves the integrity of the whole, using internal mechanics to let the system regulate itself. Whether through the clean, slicing strokes of a French boning knife or the pressurized steam chamber of a whole Beijing duck, both traditions showcase how human intelligence can transform a biological challenge into a culinary masterpiece.